Hello chess fans, today I wanted to go over a game between two 1700s that perfectly illustrates what I believe is the most important thing in chess, which is to every move think, are any of my pieces hanging? Before you make a move, you just go over all of your pieces, see if any of them are hanging, and then if none of them are hanging, you can continue with what you think the best move is. Or are any of my opponent's pieces hanging? For example, if your opponent's last move hung a piece, then you should always check a few times just to make sure it hung a piece. And if they did hang a piece, you should take the piece. And the faster you get at this, I believe the better a chess player you will become, which is why I often recommend beginners to basically play the slowest time control possible so that they can spend like a minute checking, is my move going to hang a piece? Has my opponent's move hung a piece? Are any of my pieces hanging on this move, on the last move that I can now save on this move? And for the more advanced players who are watching this video, you may think that this is simply an irrelevant rule, as most people do this subconsciously. But even at whatever level I am myself, which is 2000 over the board, I believe that I still need to look for these things, but just not on the one-dimensional level. I'm not looking for, okay, if I move my knight here, my opponent's going to take it. Obviously, that would come naturally to higher level players. But I'm thinking that if I move my knight here, in the long term, it might lose its defender because the bishop might want to go to another diagonal or something like that. So I feel like we should always think like who's defending who at the higher level, and at the beginner level, it's the most important rule because we have to think about just not hanging pieces, as most games at the beginner level are decided by piece. So now I'm going to get into basically the game, which is between two 1700s, which I feel is a very good example of why this is such a prevalent rule at any level. So the game started off e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6. And we already noticed that this pawn was being attacked, but it wasn't defended, but this pawn was counterattacked, so it seems to make sense. So here we see the player with the white pieces playing knight c3 to defend the pawn, which makes a lot of sense, because now white is threatening to take this pawn. And a principled response to this would have been to play knight c6. But we see the player with the black pieces going for, let's say, a gambit. And that's the first type of thing we have to realize, is that to counter any gambit, it is most likely that we should pretty much always accept it. And that's why the player with the white pieces took the pawn. So if you notice that you could take the pawn here before you make your move, you think, alright, when I'm in the opening, I should develop a piece. But what comes before developing a piece? Are any of my pieces hanging? Are any of my opponent's pieces hanging? And that's what the white player did here, and they managed to take the pawn. So after knight c6, they realized that their knight was hanging, and they also realized that they could trade pieces. Another important rule is to always trade pieces when you're up in material. So they took, and played d3, defending their pawn. Now d3 can be considered a minor mistake because white really should stop knight g4 because there's no way to protect this pawn. They should go with h3, but that's a little bit of advanced concept, and your opponent would have had to see this in beforehand to basically play that move. So I feel d3 is a fine move. So the opponent sees it and plays knight g4, and here white has to parry the threat of the pawn on f2, and there's really no way to do that because a queen can't defend, because knight is worth 3, bishop's worth 3, queen is worth 9, so this sort of trade would not be ideal. And so white has to give up the pawn with bishop e3. So at this point, black has gotten back the pawn. But what does white have in exchange for that? White has basically a nice center, and really not much else because black has the bishop pair. So here black can be considered slightly better. But white continues to fight with queen f3, queen d4, and knight d1. A very nice move, basically attacking this and recognizing that the queen is very annoying here and you might want to kick it away, and the bishop is also annoying. So this is a very excellent move as it attacks the bishop. And so here black recognized that are any of my pieces hanging, are any of my opponent's pieces hanging, and played bishop g5 because they realized their bishop was being double attacked. Now the one-dimensional might be if these queens were both here, the knight attacks the bishop. But two-dimensional maybe for like maybe an 800 rated player would be to see, okay, the queen defends the bishop, the queen attacks the bishop, but now we're also attacking with the knight, and two attackers greater than one defender. Okay, c3, kicking away the queen so that we can castle on this side. Queen b6, d4, cutting that diagonal, a very good move. And now we see castles, bishop c4, basically pinning this pawn. Bishop e6, takes. It might be considered that bishop d3 might have been slightly better because to avoid this bishop e6 move, but takes, and now again white recognized that their queen was hanging and decided to move it, and here they give a check, which I think is not a very good move because it just gives this move for free. Here rook f1. Remember, if you're up material, you want to trade pieces. In this case, white is not up material, but they have some less active pieces, such as this rook, so they might want to trade material. Takes, rook f8, queen c4, attacking the pawn. And here is where I feel like the most instructive point of this game comes into play. When we look at things like hanging pieces, so this pawn at the moment is hanging, and our queen made a one-move threat on the pawn. Now, I'm not saying this move is a bad move, because the queen also had to get out of the way of the rook. What I'm saying is that often lower-rated players are attracted to these one-move threats. And after black parries the threat with c5, the 1700 player with white, in this case, was so preoccupied of their threat, and they thought that their opponent was not dealing with the threat, that they actually just took here. And I'm sure it's not very hard for most of you to see why this is just a complete blunder, and why that if the 1700 player was always thinking every move that are any of my pieces hanging is my move a blunder, before they played queen e6, what they could have done is they could have been like, okay, if I queen takes here, it's giving a check. Is this a blunder? Are any pieces can take it, and then maybe draw where the queen can go, and then realize, oh wait, this queen could take it. So by not doing this 1700 player actually blundered a queen. And I hope this inspires some of you who are maybe lower rated than 1700 that 1700s are also human, and they also make a lot of mistakes. And so are any chess players. So here we see that black did consider this. They did see their pawn hanging, and they defended the pawn. And then white blunders their queen, but black obviously didn't notice that the queen was blundered, and decided to basically blunder back the queen because they had a free queen, they didn't take it. And so then here white probably realized their mistake and took the queen, takes, and so now white is just up a clean pawn. And so we see that from not really understanding that every move we need to check for these hanging pieces, we see that white has emerged with the winning position. So here white trades. Now this can be considered to be a bad move because black has doubled pawns and white doesn't, so white should probably just push them. Or maybe a better move actually would be king e2, because it seems a little bit hard to defend these pawns in the center, and you would want to go king d3 or something like that. So takes, b4. Again, white should really focus on development here with like king d3 probably, because b4 actually just blunders this pawn right here. And here we see another mistake, basically a mistake in seeing this, because if we go back at the 2000 level, anyone who's 2000 watching this video should be able to see why b4 is actually a concrete mistake. And the reason why it's a concrete mistake is because of what happens in the game, and why king e2 would have been such a better move. Because after b4 takes, we have to realize this pawn is hanging, but no one's attacking it. And so that's where we have to realize that, a piece that's not defended is also a piece that could be attacked, which is the second level process I was talking about when I said that every move we need to think, are any of our pieces hanging? Because now this piece right here is hanging. So after rook e8, the only way to defend this pawn is either to go here or here. And obviously our opponent, they didn't think about the right move because they went knight c3. I think knight f2 is slightly better, because after bishop e3, for example, this pawn is still being lost, but at least... actually, no, I think they're about the same. Yeah, this pawn is still going to be lost either way. So knight c3 is played, but then bishop f6, we see this annoying pin, and after rook c1, takes, we're back to even material, because white didn't develop their pieces enough so that they could defend their pawns. And after king f2, they could have also won another pawn, so I guess, yeah, that's why knight f2 was simply better. But they decided to play c6, because they didn't want to allow this sort of position, which would be a draw, but I think this is slightly better for black, because they have, well, no, it should be completely equal, actually. But, okay, c6, a3, I guess they were trying to keep some chances on the board. Rook e3, they avoid the trade of rooks, and here they win a pawn. So, yeah, again, here you have to see the pawn is hanging, and by putting the king in the same line as the rook and not allowing the rook to block, we don't allow, basically, ourselves to defend this pawn, and thus we lose the pawn. So now from black has created chances, but this game will somehow peter out towards white winning. So here I think black makes another sort of small error. I think in these types of positions you should avoid as much counterplay as possible, and should have taken here. Again, what white should have done was play here to not even allow black this option, but I guess white wanted counterplay. And yeah, here this seems like a much more simple option, and then white's going to have to defend this pawn, so they're going to have to lose a move. Or they can attack this pawn, and then we can have a race or something. Maybe we could go here, and so yeah. But I guess creating imbalances is how black thought they would win this game, which is pretty reasonable. And then here we see white makes a queen and is able to win the game. So when you create imbalances, you also risk losing the game, and white's cleanup here is pretty good, as they always thought that their rook was never hanging, and they used the proper technique to checkmate black. So that's the end of today's video, guys. If you liked the video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe, and I hope you always remember that in every position, even regardless of your plan, you're allowed having a plan too, is to always think, is my move hanging a piece, and is my opponent's move hanging a piece, and has my opponent hung a piece on the last move that I can now take, and are any of my pieces hanging on the last move that I can now take? And just apply this to basically every position, and the further and further you go on this principle, the further I think you'll become a better chess player. And so it's definitely something to keep in mind when playing your next chess game. That's all from me. I'll see you guys in the next one.